Monolith Productions are a very interesting development studio. Over the course of 27 years, they've released some much beloved titles, and what's unique about each one is that they're almost completely removed from one another. They've developed games for the action, spy, fantasy, and in this case, horror genre. In the year of our Lord 2005, we received some fucking phenomenal horror games. We got Doom 3, Resident Evil 4, Fahrenheit, and funnily enough Fear, released by Monolith Productions. But don't let that fool you, because today I'm not going to be discussing Fear. We'll just tuck that away for another day. Shh. You'll get your chance. Instead, we'll be discussing another horror game developed by Monolith Productions that same year, Condemned Criminal Origins. Oh, and as usual, there's going to be spoilers for the plot of Condemned, so as always, I highly recommend checking out the source material before watching the video. The story of Condemned takes place in Metro City. Well, a shithole to be completely honest. It's infested with junkies, abandoned buildings, and worst of all, the homeless. You play as Special Agent Ethan Thomas of the FBI's Serial Crime Unit, or SCU for short. In the opening prologue of the game, you're tasked with exploring an abandoned complex where a body has been discovered. This is the work of a killer known as the Matchmaker, who murders young women and poses them in various positions with male mannequins. In this case, the victim and mannequin were seemingly posed to look like they were having a dinner together. As you go on to explore the rest of the building, it becomes apparent that you're not alone, and one of the officers accompanying you believes that the Matchmaker may still be in the building.
He's right above us! Call for backup now!
This is Officer Becker. We need backup immediately. 4th and Stark. Potential homicide suspect still in building.
Officers are on their way. ETA 10 minutes.
Copy that.
Becker and I will head up the fire escape. You wait here for backup. Shit! Okay, now he's playing with us. Change of plans. Becker, secure that door. Thomas, check out the building and get these lights back on.
From here, you make your way around the building, cracking skulls, breaking doors, and eventually coming face to face with the man who's been walking around just above you.
How does it feel to be on this end of the gun? But listen, you bastard. Don't mess this up for us. We are both on the same path of righteousness.
Thomas!
And the path takes strange turns.
Police! Drop the weapon now!
Be ready for death, Agent Thomas. It shall come visiting again.
Shortly after this encounter, Ethan wakes up in his apartment, perfectly fine from that 4-story drop I might add, and finds himself talking to an old friend of the family, Malcolm Van Horn. Van Horn seems very cagey and to the point with what he says. He informs Ethan that due to the murder of those police officers with his weapon, he's been accused of murdering them. With that, he goes on the run and the game follows Ethan's exploits around Metro City, diving deep into the violent crime that's consumed the city, as well as finding the man who framed him. When discussing horror games, I almost always bring attention to the atmosphere they create, and I believe it's important to set up your game's atmosphere as early as possible. This gives the players time to adjust and immerse themselves in the world you've created, and Condemned is no different in this regard. The atmosphere on display here is one of pure desolation. Condemned takes place in various abandoned locations across Metro City, from subway tunnels as far as an old orchard on the outskirts of the city, and every location you visit shows how devastated the city is. Something has infected not just the minds of the criminals and vagrants you fight, but also the city itself. It's covered in filth, rubbish, grime and blood, and the game does a great job of immersing you in it. While walking around some of these areas, I genuinely felt a little nauseous while playing it. Some of these environments are genuinely sickening. However, Condemned doesn't want to exclusively turn your stomach with its environments. Condemned also leaves room for some very quiet and empty atmospheric storytelling too. As mentioned before, the game's main atmospheric trope is that of desolation, and the environments in Condemned are practically barren. You visit shopping centres, metro stations and schools, none of which have any sign of life in them. Well, bar the psychotic vagrants and addicts that want to murder you. These areas should be bustling, and there isn't a sign of normality. These areas are, well, excuse the pun, but they're condemned. To top it all off, the game also has superb lighting. There's some sections where Condemned, even after 16 years, looks fucking fantastic. The way the light pours in through the windows, or just barely lights up a hallway, keeps the tension high and the game looking great. Don't let Condemned's atmosphere fool you, because Condemned is, at its heart, a dark and violent survival horror game. Condemned's combat is easily the most unique aspect. Ethan and many of the vagrants he comes across are forced to use pipes, 2x4s, fire axes, sledgehammers, crowbars, and even pieces of rebar ripped from concrete pillars to defend themselves. These are just a few examples, as Condemned is chock full of not only melee weapons, but also several different ranged options to use against your enemies. However, Condemned is well aware of this, and as a result, your enemies are capable of using these weapons against you, and I guarantee you, nothing gets your blood pumping faster like hearing a shotgun get pumped around a poorly lit corridor. Not to mention that guns have limited ammunition, meaning that if you haven't been checking your magazines, chambers or your port, you could find yourself trying to fire at an enemy with no ammo left, leaving you nearly defenseless. With all that said, it seems like Condemned has the recipe for being a challenging and nerve-wracking game. However, there is one small issue.
The taser breaks the fucking game.
Kind of. The taser in Condemned is a stupid mechanic that removes nearly all the tension set up perfectly by the primarily melee-based combat. With one push of a button, whoopsie daisy, now you're dead. The enemies in the game haven't got a chance when you use this thing. It instantly puts them in a stun lock, leaving them open to be attacked, and almost always put down in one swing. The worst part is that later on, Rosa, your FBI partner, gives you an upgrade to the standard taser, making it even more broken. Now not only do your enemies get stun locked, but it practically melts their fucking brains and knocks them down instantly with no chance to come back. Here's a good example. Watch these two scenarios back to back and see the difference. Now, it may seem like there wasn't much of a difference between either of these clips, but consider this. That enemy didn't even get a chance to look at me before I tased him. However, without the taser, the split second of seeing him run for the shotgun was enough to make me think, oh shit, there's a shotgun on the table. Swing, bang, the shotgun is mine. Both scenarios ended with me receiving a shotgun, but only one made me momentarily panic and react quickly. However, despite this somewhat annoying and broken game mechanic, I would still say Condemned's combat is good. Just don't use the taser, try and time your blocking and attacking maneuvers better, and you're all set for a true survival horror experience. Condemned's enemy design is also quite a unique feature. As you may have noticed from the gameplay, the aforementioned vagrants and junkies present a threat to your character, but as well as this, there's burn victims, scavengers, hallucinations, and Anne from The Chase? Okay, so it goes without saying that Condemned does have some silly enemies in it, but for the most part they're all fairly believable. More importantly than that, however, they aren't mindless grunts that will charge your position like that 10th Russian in Modern Warfare 3. They lay in wait for Ethan, they hide around corners, sneak around the room, and sometimes they even... The AI in Condemned, while not perfect, is still very competent and does a good job at scaring the shit out of you. But what's even more interesting about this is that on occasion, the enemies will actually attack one another. This is a great little touch, and it further develops the idea that Metro City as a whole is losing its mind as people indiscriminately maim and murder one another. I also wanted to focus on one particular section in Condemned, because not only do I feel it's the scariest location in the entire game, but it's hands down one of the most unsettling areas I've explored in a game. The pacing is fantastic, and despite the fact this level only takes you roughly 15 minutes, 10 if you rush past it, it still manages to have some of the most effective scares in the whole game, and there's two I'd like to pay particular attention to. The entire time you're exploring the shopping centre, you see just how decrepit everything has become. Coat hangers are strewn about, entire shops are blocked off by debris and shelves, and easily the most unnerving part is that you have this constant feeling you're being watched. The mannequins around the building are mostly elevated above you, and the lighting is pointed upwards, so it bounces off the underside of their faces. It makes them seem very imposing, and on a handful of occasions, you really do begin to question Ethan's sanity. These hallucinations that Ethan keeps having begin to get worse as the game goes on, and the highlight of this comes at around the halfway point of the level. The other aspect I wanted to bring attention to is that the enemies in the department store have become completely deranged. This doesn't seem too out of the ordinary up until you realise these psychopaths have cased their skin in wax and disguised themselves as mannequins. Almost immediately the tension skyrockets because now you begin to become paranoid and flinch at every mannequin you walk past, fearing that one might attack you. The game at this point has thoroughly freaked you out, and it seems as though the game almost gets a kick out of it. This area is by far the scariest in the entirety of Condemned, and when compared to some of the other areas in Condemned, I can't help but feel that more of this kind of unpredictability would have helped the game in the long run. Most areas in the game do have a heavy atmosphere and make your skin crawl, but none of them ever made me this paranoid. It's revealed once you reach Bart's department store that the man who attacked you in the opening of the game is not the matchmaker. This is the matchmaker, and it seems that whoever got to him is the same man that attacked you in the opening. With this information in tow and some digging around, you and Rosa discovered that his next victim is likely Carl Anderson, aka the Torturer, yet another one of Ethan's serial killers he's been tracking down. This leads to an interesting revelation. The man who attacked you is a killer of serial killers, a serial killer X. He's been stalking Ethan for months, years even, and using the information he gathered from him to track the killers Ethan was hunting himself. Rosa figures that the torturer's next victim will likely be an old member of staff from his high school. When visiting the school that Carl attended, you begin to see visions of Carl's victim running through the school. When finding Carl's victim, Rosa asks you to take a picture of the body. He reveals that serial killer X got there before you and kidnapped Carl. With this information and a little deduction on Ethan's part, Van Horn and Ethan drive to an apple orchard in the nearby town of Briar. Once there, Ethan must use his detective equipment he's been using over the course of the game to follow a trail. These trails lead to a series of words that, when put together, form a phrase that reveal a hidden location. Once discovered, you have to make your way back up the stairs and find Carl. By this point, Carl is running scared. Serial killer X has used his methods against him. He's chased him, beaten him, and due to the stress and physical trauma, forced Carl to kill himself. Just as Carl would have done to his victims. Upon finding Carl's body, you disguise yourself and cover your face in blood for good measure, and just as you begin to prepare all this, Serial Killer X arrives to finish the job. But Serial Killer X is expecting Carl, not you.
Ah, Carl. You've given up.
Wait for it.
It's a shame.
Wait for it.
Well, perhaps you know what you have put others through. Although it makes you even more pathetic that you weren't brave enough to kill yourself. Now I'll have to do the job. and make it look right. So sad. Now! You shouldn't have come here.
And with that, Serial Killer X runs away, and a tense fight ensues where you and Serial Killer X have to take swings at one another. The music that plays is extremely nerve-wracking, making the fight all the more panic-inducing. However, you will eventually beat back Serial Killer X, but before you can deliver the final blow, Van Horn attacks Ethan and knocks him out. In a brief cutscene, it's revealed that Serial Killer X is actually Van Horn's nephew, and he's been using you to locate him and hopefully convince him to give up and come back home. But he's having none of it. After a short torture scene, Ethan's finger is sliced off by Serial Killer X, and Van Horn quickly subdues him before saying,
Quickly! You must find and destroy it. It has caused all this madness. Go, kill it, now!
And so the final stretch of the game is in sight. Ethan has to fight his way through hallucinations and waves of enemies to reach the final boss of Condemned, the Hate. This is what's been causing the madness and decay all over Metro City, and the final fight against it is, well, it's a bit fucking easy if I'm being honest. But after defeating the Hate, Ethan is driven home by Van Horn, but not before realising
Stop the car.
No, you still don't understand. He's done unspeakable things, even though those he killed were killers themselves. But he isn't responsible. He's not in his right mind. He's...
Stop the goddamn car now!
Serial Killer X is in the boot of Van Horn's car. Ethan, and in turn the player, are met with a final choice: kill Serial Killer X or allow him to live. However, even if you spare him, he shimmies out of the rope and shoots himself, so the choice doesn't really matter here. Time goes by, and Ethan is in a cafe. Upon hearing from Rosa that a cult was behind everything involving Metro City and Serial Killer X, Rosa informs Ethan she's wired, and the conversation is cut short. And with that, Condemned Criminal Origins comes to a close. So in conclusion, Condemned Criminal Origins, like I've said in the title of this video, is a flawed masterpiece. If you can look past a lot of the errors that this game has, you will find a fantastic horror experience. I'd like to sit here and say that Condemned is one of the best horror games ever made, but it's just, I'm so conflicted about it. I mean, things like the lighting are fantastic, but the graphics are a bit muddy and the facial animation's a bit unexpressive. The combat is great, but there are things like the taser that break it a small bit. And the plot is very interesting, but there are a lot of plot points that aren't really followed up on all that much. There's a lot of supernatural things going on in Condemned as well, but it never really gets followed up on. Now, Condemned did have a sequel a few years later, but
Rosa, I'm tired, and my head is screaming for a drink, so get to the point.
Maybe we'll talk about that another time. As for now, I just want to thank all of you for watching as usual, and I hope that through this little analysis I've done on Condemned, you might be convinced to try it out yourself. Now, don't get me wrong, Condemned isn't the best horror game ever made. It has its share of issues, but if you can look past them and you are looking for a genuinely unsettling experience, Condemned is well worth your time. But again, until next time, this is it for now, so take it easy, and I hope to see you again soon.